In the glittering halls of Mayfair, where scandal travels faster than music at a ball, the Duke of Ravenshire made a vow that froze every whisper. "I'll marry you," he said to Lady Celeste Harrow, "but never love you." The words fell like frost upon her trembling heart. Yet beneath her curtsy and quiet smile burned a courage even the tongue could not crush. From the altar to the opera, she would endure humiliation, whispered scorn, and exile from affection. But when steel met flesh on a rain-soaked battlefield and death came for the Duke, it was the woman he had scorned who stood between him and fate, proving that some hearts redeem through fire. Not forgiveness. Did this story reach your heart? Like, share, and let us know your hometown or country. The drawing room of Ravenshire House was the very embodiment of elegance, high-ceilinged, wreathed in pale gold silk, and perfumed with roses arranged by unseen hands. Every candlestick gleamed. Every curtain was drawn precisely half to let in the mellow afternoon sun. Yet, for all its warmth, Lady Celeste Harrow felt the room colder than the December wind outside. She stood by the hearth, gloved hands folded before her, as the Duke of Ravenshire crossed the carpet with the measured grace of a man accustomed to command. His boots made no sound, though his presence seemed to still even the clocks ticking. He was tall, perfectly composed and carved, it seemed to her, not from flesh but from ice. "Lady Celeste," he said at last, his voice steady, his expression unreadable. "You are aware of the circumstances that have led me here." Celeste inclined her head, her voice soft but unwavering. "I am, Your Grace." "Then let us be practical." He drew a small velvet case from his coat pocket and set it upon the marble mantelpiece. "You will have my name, my protection, and my estates. I will expect discretion, obedience, and dignity in return. Lovey," he paused, his mouth tightening, "must not be among your expectations." The words fell between them like frost upon petals. Celeste's throat tightened. Her father's debts had left their once gentle name hanging by a thread in the eyes of society. Her younger sister's dowry depended upon this match. Her mother's failing health depended upon security. She had known this proposal was not born of affection. Yet still, hearing his tone, polite, distant, and utterly final, she felt the sting of humiliation rise hot behind her eyes. "I understand," she murmured, steadying her voice. "Duty, not desire. Your Grace is most clear." A faint flicker, was it regret, passed through his blue-grey eyes, but it vanished almost at once. "Then we are agreed," he said. "Our betrothal shall be announced at the Marquis of Ashbourne's ball this Saturday. I trust you will not find that disagreeable." "Not at all." She curtsied, perfectly measured, perfectly false. He bowed in return, the exchange so restrained that even propriety itself seemed to sigh. When he turned to leave, Celeste's eyes fell upon the velvet case. For a moment she thought he had forgotten it. But he stopped at the door and said, without looking back, "You may keep the ring." "My mother's originally." "It is inadequate." The latch clicked softly behind him. Celeste moved toward the mantelpiece, her reflection flickering in the gilded mirror above it. The case felt heavier than it should. She opened it with trembling fingers. Inside lay a ring, a single diamond set upon silver filigree, cold and magnificent. It might have been a crown for her finger or a shackle. She slipped it on, watching the light fracture across its surface. For one brief instant, she saw her own eyes mirrored in it, not a bride's but a captive's. From the corridor outside came the muted hum of servants and the faint sound of a carriage departing. She listened, half hoping, half dreading that he might return. But only silence answered. A rustle behind her drew her attention. Mrs. Finch, her family's housekeeper, entered quietly, curtsying low. "My lady," she said gently, "the Duke has gone. Shall I have tea brought in?" "No," Celeste whispered. "Only, please ask my maid to prepare my writing desk." Mrs. Finch hesitated. "To write him, my lady." Celeste gave a faint, sad smile. "No, to write myself. It helps one remember who she is." By dusk the fire had dimmed to embers. Celeste sat by the window, pen in hand, as a drizzle began to veil London's rooftops in mist. Her words flowed hesitantly upon the page, not addressed, not intended to be sent. "To the man who will one day call me wife, you do not love me, nor I you. Yet I pray that one day when pride yields to gentleness, you may see that I wished you no harm. I only wanted to stand beside you without shame." She stopped, the ink blotting slightly on the paper, her heart aching with the futility of the gesture. Folding the page, she pressed it between the covers of a book, Paradise Lost, and closed it quietly. Outside, the street lamps flickered to life. Somewhere beyond, in another house, the Duke of Ravenshire likely poured himself a glass of brandy, unmoved, untouched. Yet she could not hate him. He was a man broken by some ghost of betrayal she could not name. She had seen it in the way his voice tightened upon the word love. Perhaps she, too, would learn to live without it. 2 days later, her mother called her to the sitting room, cheeks flushed with renewed pride. "Oh, Celeste," she cried softly, clasping her daughter's hands, "you've done what none of us could. The Duke of Ravenshire, the ton will speak of nothing else for months." "They will speak," Celeste said, her voice faint. "That much I am certain." Her mother did not hear the weariness beneath the words. She was already instructing the dressmaker, speaking of silks and lace, of pearls and veils. That night Celeste stood before her mirror again, the ring glinting in the candlelight. She practiced her smile, polite, serene, untouched. It would need to be perfect at the ball, for society's gaze was crueler than any man's, and every curtsy she made from this day forth would be judged. The day of the announcement dawned clear, but brittle. Carriages rattled across Grosvenor Square, as gossip bloomed like frost flowers. "The penniless Harrow girl," they whispered, "has caught a duke." Caught. The word pricked like a thorn. In the dressing room, her maid fastened the final clasp of her sapphire blue gown. The colour chosen by her mother matched the Ravenshire crest, an irony not lost on Celeste. The gown's silken weight pressed upon her like armour. As she descended the marble staircase to join her mother's carriage, a draught of cold air swept through the open door. It brushed her cheek like an omen, and she paused at the threshold. "Are you unwell, my lady?" her maid asked. Celeste's hand lingered at the ring. "No," she said softly. "Only as I feel as though I am stepping into winter." That evening at the Marquise's ball, the chandeliers burned bright enough to blind. Musicians played, laughter rose, and jewels sparkled like dew. When the Duke entered, every head turned. When Celeste followed on his arm, the hush that fell was deafening. "Your Grace," one lady whispered behind a fan, "is she not exquisite?" "Exquisite," replied another, "but desperate." "I hear her father owes half of Mayfair." The Duke heard. Celeste felt the tension in his hand as he released her at the foot of the grand staircase. His jaw tightened. His eyes flicked briefly toward her, not tenderly but almost protectively. Then, before the crowd, he raised his voice just enough to carry. "My fiancée, Lady Celeste Harrow." The announcement rippled through the hall, greeted by polite applause and concealed envy. Yet Celeste felt the applause like rain upon glass, seen but never touching. When the music resumed, the Duke bowed slightly. "Shall we dance, my lady?" "If it pleases your Grace." "It does not," he said quietly, "but it must be done." And so they danced, beautifully, mechanically, two figures bound by duty, spinning through candlelight that shimmered like tears. When the final waltz ended, Celeste withdrew to the edge of the ballroom. The scent of roses and champagne thick in the air. Across the room, she caught the Duke speaking to another lady, tall, laughing, familiar. Something within her, faint but undeniable, twisted. Mrs. Finch's words echoed in her mind. "To write him, my lady." No, she thought. To remember myself. But even self-respect begins to tremble under the weight of humiliation. As the orchestra struck its final note, the Duke turned, and their eyes met across the glittering floor. His expression was unreadable, but his gaze lingered, as if questioning his own indifference. The crowd parted between them, candlelight flickering like uncertainty itself. Celeste curtsied once more, this time not to him but to fate, and as she rose, the faintest whisper crossed her lips, unheard, unacknowledged but true. "This is not love. Yet it shall make me stronger than love." The grand chandeliers of the Marquis of Ashbourne's ballroom shone like captive constellations, casting rivers of gold and ivory across gowns and polished marble. Music swelled from the orchestra pit, violins whispering beneath a melody of triumph, and the scent of roses, perfume, and powdered wigs mingled in the air. For all its brilliance, the night felt suffocating to Lady Celeste Harrow, soon to be the Duchess of Ravenshire. Her sapphire gown, stitched to perfection, glimmered each time the light caressed its folds. Pearls encircled her slender neck, a gift from her mother. who now fluttered among the other matrons with giddy pride. Every head turned toward Celeste as she entered upon the Duke's arm. The room, it seemed, bowed to them, and yet she felt smaller than she had ever felt before. The Duke's expression remained composed, carved in the same restrained civility he wore like armor. "Remember, my lady," he murmured, bending slightly toward her as the master of ceremonies announced their arrival, "you represent Ravenshire tonight. Every eye in this room measures you." "I am accustomed to scrutiny, Your Grace," she replied softly, though her pulse betrayed her. "What I am not accustomed to is indifference." His jaw tightened imperceptibly. "Indifference is safer than affection." He released her arm. She curtsied as protocol demanded. And then he was gone, drifting through the glittering crowd toward a lady in a pale pink gown whose laughter rose like the clink of crystal. Celeste stood near the marble pillars, her hand resting upon the cool surface, as if drawing strength from it. Around her, London's elite danced and whispered, their jewels catching light like scandalous secrets. "She wears that ring as though she earned it," murmured a voice behind her fan. "The Duke barely looked at her," replied another. "Even his coat shows her more affection." The laughter that followed was low, cruel, and perfectly timed to the orchestra's flourish. Celeste's spine straightened. Her heart, however, cracked just a little more. She lifted her chin, her smile serene. "It is remarkable," she said to no one in particular, "how envy makes poets of the witless." A gentleman nearby, a kindly old viscount, heard her and chuckled. "You wound them with grace, Lady Celeste. That is rarer than beauty." "Grace is a woman's only armor, my lord," she replied, "and sometimes her only revenge." The music changed to a waltz. Couples formed with rustling silk and murmured delight. Celeste stood alone, her hands clasped neatly before her, watching her betrothed move elegantly across the floor with his chosen partner. Lady Evelyn Montrose, her rival from childhood, golden-haired and honey-voiced, smiled up at him with an ease that felt almost intimate. Celeste told herself it did not matter. Theirs was a union of duty, not devotion. She repeated it like prayer. Duty, not desire. And yet, the sight burned more sharply than she had imagined. When the next dance began, a young officer approached her, nervous but gallant. "My lady, might I have the honor?" She hesitated, glancing toward the Duke. He did not look her way. "You may," she said finally, allowing herself to be led onto the floor. The officer's steps were eager, his conversation polite but unremarkable. Celeste's movements, however, were effortless, each turn, each glance a study in poise. The crowd began to notice her after all. Whispers shifted from mockery to admiration. "She dances exquisitely," one lady breathed. "Like a queen," another sighed. From across the ballroom, the Duke's gaze found her. His expression did not change, but his hand stilled slightly where it rested upon Lady Evelyn's waist. Halfway through the waltz, Celeste's slipper caught upon the hem of her gown. She faltered, her balance tipping. The officer froze in alarm. A ripple of laughter, subtle, malicious, rose from a corner where the younger ladies gathered. Lady Evelyn's smirk glimmered like a blade beneath candlelight. Before Celeste could steady herself, a strong hand caught her by the wrist. "Careful," said the Duke, his voice low but resonant. "The floor is less forgiving than the tongue." Her eyes lifted to meet his. For a heartbeat, the music seemed to hush. The heat of his touch, so unexpected, so human, sent a tremor through her composure. "Your Grace," she breathed, withdrawing her hand slowly. "You need not trouble yourself. I have survived harsher falls." His lips curved faintly. "No doubt you have." Lady Evelyn, dismissed with a polite bow, retreated, her color high. The Duke turned to the orchestra and nodded. The musicians, sensing their cue, began another waltz. "Shall we?" he asked. Celeste hesitated. "It would appear you have already made quite the impression this evening, Your Grace." He extended his hand, gloved and immaculate. "Then allow me to correct it." They began to dance. The crowd drew back to watch. Under the chandeliers they moved as though time itself had slowed, two figures circling in rhythm, his touch light yet certain, her gaze steady though her pulse raced. The air shimmered with candle smoke and unspoken words. "You have a talent for silence," she murmured as they turned. "It speaks louder than kindness." "And you have a talent," he returned, "for making silence feel inadequate." A soft gasp escaped her, half amusement, half disbelief. "Was that a compliment, Your Grace?" He smiled faintly, the smallest surrender. "Do not grow accustomed to it." The music swelled. The chandeliers glittered like fire. All around them whispers faded into awe. Celeste's gown flared as he spun her, graceful, regal, untouchable. Yet beneath her serene exterior, confusion bloomed. His nearness unsettled her. The man who had once sworn never to love her now looked at her as though she was something he could neither disdain nor dismiss. When the final note lingered in the air, he released her hand but did not step away. "You danced beautifully," he said, voice low enough that only she could hear. "It was necessity," she replied. "A woman must either dance or be forgotten." "Then may you never be forgotten," he said. For a moment it was not a command, but a confession. As the orchestra packed away their instruments and guests began to drift toward the supper room, Celeste excused herself to the terrace. The night air was cool, sharp with the scent of jasmine and candle smoke. She pressed a hand to her heart, uncertain whether it beat from pride or confusion. Beyond the terrace balustrade, London glittered, golden windows glowing against the dark. Inside, laughter rippled, gossip renewed its hum, and the Duke of Ravenshire's figure moved among the crowd once more. Remote as the moon. Yet when she glanced back through the glass, she caught him watching her, not with contempt nor pity, but something else. Something unguarded. She turned away before she could define it. From the ballroom, Lady Evelyn's voice drifted like perfume. How tragic, to be admired only in public. Celeste smiled faintly to herself. And how pitiable, she whispered, to be admired by all and loved by none. Her reflection in the glass looked older than she remembered, stronger, lonelier resolved. The Duke's faint outline still lingered behind her. Motionless, as if uncertain whether to approach or retreat, she did not turn again. Instead, she lifted her chin toward the night sky, its stars dim beneath the city haze, and murmured to herself, "I shall not break. Not here, not yet." And with that vow trembling in the air, Lady Celeste Harrow, Duchess-to-be, stepped back into the light and music of the ballroom, unaware that the next whisper would carry her name, and a letter would soon arrive to shatter what little peace her heart had built. Winter came early that year to Ravenshire Manor. The November winds crept through the old stone corridors, whispering beneath doorways and rattling window panes, as though to remind its occupants that warmth, like happiness, could never be taken for granted. Lady Celeste sat at her escritoire, its polished walnut gleaming faintly in the dim light of the hearth. Outside, the world was a blur of white and grey, the gardens buried beneath frost, the lake a sheet of glass. Within, silence ruled, gentle but suffocating. The Duke had been gone at dawn and returned long after the candles had burned low. When he was present, their words were courteous, their tones polite, but the pauses between them grew heavier each day. They existed not as husband and wife, nor even as companions, but as two exiled souls who shared a roof and avoided the same fire. On this night, as the wind sighed against the windows, Celeste dipped her quill and began another letter she would never send. "Your Grace, there are moments I almost believe we could speak plainly, when your eyes soften or your voice forgets its restraint. But the next moment your silence seals us both away again. I do not ask for love, only truth. Tell me, what wound did I awaken that makes you so determined to punish us both?" The ink blotted at the word truth. She frowned, then set the pen aside, pressing the page to her chest before folding it neatly and sliding it into a small drawer already heavy with secrets. There were at least 20 letters now, unsent, unread, yet impossible to destroy. Each one bore the weight of what could not be said aloud. Below stairs, the servants had long ceased whispering about their employer's coldness. Now they called it the Quiet War. Still, Mrs. Harrow, the housekeeper, sighed over it at supper. "Such beauty and sorrow under one roof," she murmured to the cook. "They're like two candles set on opposite ends of a table. Each burns alone, though both give light." The butler, solemn as a priest, shook his head. "Best to keep one's distance from noble hearts. They bruise without bleeding." Upstairs, the Duke stood before the fire in his private study. The hour was late, the brandy untouched. Shadows carved his features sharper, sterner, as though remorse itself had chiseled them. He reached for the small oak box that sat upon his desk. Inside lay several folded letters, his own confessions, begun and abandoned under cover of darkness. "Celeste, you ask nothing of me, and that is what breaks me. I once swore never to love again, yet your silence makes a mockery of that oath." He had written that one a week ago, when he'd found her asleep by the window. a candle guttering beside her, her face serene and pale in the moonlight. Something in that sight had pierced through the iron of his composure, but dawn had come and pride had returned with it. The letter remained unsent. Now he picked up another sheet, hesitated, then tore it in half. The sound echoed in the stillness like a gunshot. He poured himself a drink but did not taste it. "Fool," he muttered under his breath. "You would rather burn than yield." The following afternoon brought pale sunlight and brittle air. Celeste wandered into the library, its vastness echoing faintly beneath her footsteps. Books lined every wall. Thousands of volumes, the Duke's collection, curated with military precision. She had not intended to linger, only to escape the emptiness of her own chamber. Yet as she traced her fingers over the bindings, her eyes fell upon the Duke's desk in the far corner, papers scattered, quills left uncapped. A rare disarray. Curiosity, dangerous, delicate, drew her closer. She hesitated, then saw a sealed letter atop the desk. Her name was written upon it in his unmistakable hand, Lady Celeste. Her breath caught. For a moment she stood motionless, torn between fear and longing. Then with trembling hands she lifted it. The wax seal was unbroken. Perhaps it was wrong, perhaps it was madness, but she pressed her thumb to the seal and opened it. There was only one line written inside. "I cannot hate you, though I wish I could." The words struck her like a physical blow. She read them again, her eyes blurring. Not love, but not indifference either. Something raw, unguarded, pain perhaps, or the beginning of regret. She folded the paper once more, her hands shaking, and placed it back exactly where she had found it. Then she turned and left the study before tears could betray her. In the corridor she paused, one hand against the wall to steady herself. The chill from the stone seeped through her glove. She closed her eyes. If he cannot hate me, she thought, then what keeps him from loving me? But there was no answer, only the distant tolling of the church bell and the soft hiss of snow beginning to fall. That evening, she dined alone. The Duke had sent word he would be detained in the study with correspondence. A euphemism for solitude. As she toyed with her food, the wind pressed against the windows again, carrying the hush of snowdrifts settling over the world. The candles flickered, throwing twin shadows on the tablecloth, her own and the empty chair opposite her. At last she rose, crossing to the window. The garden below was transformed, white, silent, mercilessly beautiful. 1,000 frozen roses lay entombed beneath the snow, their color lost, their perfume gone. She whispered to her reflection, "Perhaps love is like that, a bloom too fragile for winter." Then she caught sight of movement outside, the Duke, walking alone across the terrace, his dark coat stark against the whiteness. Snow clung to his shoulders. He paused, glanced toward the light of the dining-room window, then turned away again. Something in his gait, weariness, isolation, moved her beyond reason. She pressed her palm to the glass, wanting to call out, to end this cruel distance. But pride, her old companion, whispered restraint. He must come to you of his own accord. She let the curtain fall. Later, in her chamber, she lit a single candle and took out one of her unsent letters. She read it again. The ink faded slightly where her tears had touched it days ago. "I do not know how to reach you," she had written. "If silence is your fortress, then I will not scale it. I will wait, not for love, but for peace." Folding it carefully, she tied it with a ribbon and placed it inside her jewelry box beside the ring he had given her. Both gleamed faintly in the candlelight, precious yet heavy, symbols of what was and what might never be. Outside, the snow thickened, blanketing the manor in unbroken white. The fire in the hearth cracked softly, then dimmed. In the Duke's study below, another candle flickered, the same flame reflected in 2 separate rooms, burning for 2 separate hearts that could not find their way toward each other. Somewhere deep within the silence of Ravenshire, a letter lay waiting, unsent and unfinished, and as the snow continued to fall, pure, cold and unyielding, Celeste whispered into the dark, "Perhaps one day, Your Grace, you will write what neither of us can say." The wind answered with a sigh that might have been sorrow or promise. The carriages lining Covent Garden glittered beneath a velvet sky, their lamps glimmering like fallen stars. Within the grand facade of the Royal Opera House, London's finest gathered in their silks and jewels, each one draped in grace, ambition, and gossip. The chandeliers blazed, the red velvet curtains shimmered, and the scent of perfume mingled with candle smoke and anticipation. Lady Celeste Ravenshire, still newly made, Duchess in the Tun's eyes, entered the opera box reserved for the House of Ravenshire, with the poise of a queen and the heart of a penitent. Her gown was ivory satin trimmed with pale gold embroidery, modest yet luminous, as if defying the rumour that she was a sorrowful wife. The Duke followed moments later. He bowed as custom required, but his greeting was perfunctory. His tone composed. "London expects us, my lady," he said, taking the seat opposite hers. "Then let us not disappoint them," she replied softly, lowering her gaze. They sat apart, two figures separated not merely by the aisle between them, but by every silence that had filled the months since their union. The overture began. Violins rose in liquid harmony, and the great red curtain lifted to reveal a stage painted in moonlight. The soprano, a slender woman in white, began to sing of lost love and repentance, her voice clear as crystal, piercing the silence of the Duke's box like truth itself. Celeste's fan trembled in her gloved hand. The music struck too deep. Every note seemed to echo her own unspoken letters, her own unwept tears. She turned slightly, her eyes drifting across the golden curve of boxes opposite, and there, framed by the soft glow of candlelight, sat Lady Evelyn Montrose, her rival. Her ghost. Lady Evelyn's gaze was fixed upon the Duke, not furtively, not innocently, but with that particular warmth of one who has known familiarity and once claimed its comfort. The smallest smile passed between them, too subtle for most, but Celeste saw it. And the Tun, attuned as ever to scandal, saw her see it. A murmur rippled through the opera house, hushed yet unmistakable. "Do you see?" "She caught him staring," whispered a woman behind her fan. "Poor Duchess," came another voice, delicate with false pity. "Even the music cannot drown her shame." Celeste felt the heat rise to her cheeks. Beneath her fan, her breath quickened. Her composure, her only shield, threatened to crack. Across the box, the Duke seemed to sense it. His eyes met hers for the briefest instant, unreadable. Assessing, perhaps even apologetic, but then he looked away. That, more than anything, undid her. She rose with quiet grace, her silk skirts whispering against the carpet. The movement drew glances from the audience below. "My lady?" murmured her companion, a kindly marchioness seated beside her. "Forgive me," Celeste said faintly. "The heat is oppressive." She left before her composure failed entirely. The corridor beyond the box was dim, lined with mirrors that reflected her pale face and trembling hands. The golden sconces flickered like 1,000 judging eyes. She walked quickly, her heart pounding in time with the orchestra's tragic refrain. The soprano's voice followed her even here, pleading, mourning, forgiving. Celeste could not bear it. As she reached the marble stairwell, she heard the echo of a familiar voice behind her. "Celeste, wait." The sound froze her mid-step. The Duke's voice. Low, restrained, but tinged with something unfamiliar. Urgency. She closed her eyes. How cruel that the first time he said her name without title was here, in a corridor heavy with humiliation. Slowly she turned, her veil half lowered. He was only a few paces away, tall and composed even now, though his expression was softened by the faintest trace of guilt. "Your Grace," she said, her voice scarcely audible, "you need not follow. It would displease your company." "You mistake me," he replied. There was nothing in that exchange. Celeste's lips curved in a bitter smile. "I did not ask for explanation. London will make one for me soon enough." "You should not believe every whisper," he said. "And yet," she answered, "it is all I hear." For a moment, silence swelled between them, intimate, suffocating. The orchestra's crescendo seeped through the walls, a storm of violins that made her heart ache. He took a single step closer. "Celeste!" She shook her head, retreating slightly. "Do not speak my name again, Your Grace. I find it sounds too much like pity." Then, without waiting for his reply, she turned and descended the staircase, the hem of her gown trailing like spilled moonlight. Outside, the night was a blur of carriage lamps and falling snow. The air bit at her cheeks as she entered her coach alone, the driver startled by her sudden return. "Home, my lady?" he asked. "Yes," she whispered. "Home." As the horses set off through the streets, the city's brilliance dimmed behind her. Through the frosted window, she saw couples laughing, cloaked figures hurrying through the gaslight haze, all oblivious to the quiet ruin that rode past them. Her gloved hand clenched around her fan until it cracked. Inside her chest, pride warred with despair. She had endured indifference before, but never exposure, never public confirmation that her love, though dutiful and noble in appearance, was but a performance for society's amusement. Still, tears would not fall. Dignity remained her only solace, and she clung to it like the last candle in a darkened room. When she reached Ravenshire House, the butler opened the door, startled to see her return before the final act. "Your Grace, is something amiss?" "Nothing that can be remedied," she replied quietly, handing him her cloak. The fire in the drawing-room still burned from their earlier departure. She crossed to it, holding her hands toward the warmth but feeling none of it. On the mantel rested the framed announcement of their marriage, 2 perfect names gilded in gold. How hollow it seemed now. She sank into a chair, eyes unfocused. The music still played in her mind, the soprano's lament threading through her thoughts. Love once lost may still forgive, but pride will never forget. The next morning, the newspapers arrived before dawn. The footman hesitated before delivering them, but she was already awake, sitting by the window as snowflakes drifted over London's rooftops. The headline caught her eye instantly. "The Duchess's silent exit. Society stunned by Lady Ravenshire's mid-performance departure." Below, the commentary was cruelly poetic, speculating about a quarrel, a lover's jealousy, an unguarded glance. They had turned her pain into theatre. She folded the paper neatly and set it aside. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine what the Duke would feel when he read the same article. Anger, perhaps, or shame. But not remorse. Never remorse. Her eyes drifted toward the small drawer of her writing desk, the one that held her unsent letters. She opened it, ran her fingers over the folded pages, then drew out a fresh sheet. "Your Grace," she wrote slowly, "you once said indifference was safer than affection. I wonder, does it feel safe now?" She did not sign it. She did not even fold it. The paper lay blank at the edges, half a confession, half a challenge. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the city in silent judgment. The world looked pure from afar, white, perfect, and cold. Celeste rose, walked to the window, and whispered to her reflection, "Let them feast on my sorrow if they must. It will not be the end of me." Far away, the opera's final refrain lingered faintly through the frozen air, a ghost of music, a promise of reckoning. And somewhere beyond that, a letter already began to move through unseen hands, one that would turn her humiliation into scandal. Morning crept reluctantly into Ravenshire House, pale and cold, as though the dawn itself hesitated to touch what it would soon reveal. The golden curtains of the breakfast room stirred faintly in the chill breeze. The Duke sat at the head of the long mahogany table, his newspaper open, his teacup untouched. At first he read the words without comprehension, the letters blurring together in the slanted light. But then a headline caught him, the kind that curdled. "The blood of any man who prized his name above his heart," Of passion from the Duchess of Ravenshire. To a young officer, scandal rocks the ton, his hand stilled. The paper trembled once before he folded it with mechanical precision and laid it beside his plate. His butler, perceiving danger, retreated silently. The Duke unfolded the smaller slip that accompanied the article, a copy of the supposed letter. The handwriting was exquisite, feminine, painfully familiar. "My dearest Captain, were I free of these vows that chain me, I would fly to you." The Duke suspects nothing for now. Each word felt like acid upon his pride. He rose, the chair scraping against the marble floor. "Send for her Grace," he said evenly, though his voice was tight as wire. Celeste entered moments later, unaware of the storm that awaited her. Morning light trailed her footsteps as she crossed the threshold, graceful, serene, her pale gown shimmering faintly in the cool glow. "Good morning." "Your Grace," she said gently, pausing by the door. He did not bow. "Is it?" Something in his tone chilled her. Her gaze drifted to the paper upon the table. "Has something occurred?" He held up the forged letter as though it were an indictment. "You will tell me, madam, if this is your hand." Her brows drew together in confusion. "My hand? Do not feign ignorance." His voice cracked like thunder through the room. "It bears your name, your writing, your betrayal." Celeste stepped forward, the color draining from her cheeks. "Betrayal? I do not understand." "Read it," he snapped, thrusting the page toward her. Read what London believes of its Duchess. She took it, trembling. Her eyes traced the words once, twice. When she finally looked up, her lashes glistened with disbelief. "Your Grace, this is not mine. I have never— Enough!" He turned away sharply, his hand gripping the mantle. "The tongue has been merciful only in its restraint. Were I another man, I would challenge this officer at dawn." Her voice broke softly. "Then you would wrong two innocents, not one." He faced her then, and for the first time, fury and pain mingled in his eyes. "Do you deny it?" "Swear it upon your honor, Celeste." "I swear it upon my soul." Silence stretched between them, taut as a blade. The ticking clock mocked them both. But pride, cold, corrosive pride, spoke louder than love ever could. "I have been made a fool," he said finally. "Whether by your hand or another's, the consequence is the same. You have dishonored me." She stepped closer, her hands clasped before her. "Your Grace, I have only ever loved in silence. You know this, do I?" His laugh was hollow. "All I know is that you carry yourself with saintly dignity, while the city laughs behind its gloves." "Let them laugh," she whispered. "Their ridicule cannot wound me as your doubt does." He flinched, not visibly, but enough that she saw the faint tremor in his jaw. For a heartbeat, something human flickered across his expression, but it vanished as quickly as it came. "Pack your things," he said quietly. "You will leave Ravenshire by evening. The country estate will suit your sensibilities." The word struck harder than any curse. "Exile, then?" she murmured. "Without trial? Without truth? Without scandal," he corrected, voice clipped. "It is all that remains to preserve what little dignity this family has left." Her lips trembled, but her spine remained straight. "Then I go not as a sinner, but as a sacrifice." "May that comfort you, Your Grace." He did not answer. She sank to her knees, an act not of submission but of desperation. Her hands reached for his, trembling. "Look at me, Edward, for once not as a title, not as a duty. Look at me as the woman who would have given her heart if you had only asked for it." He pulled away as though her touch burned him. "You will ruin us both if you stay." She rose slowly, her tears drying before they fell. "And if I leave, Your Grace, what will remain?" He turned to the window, unable to face the answer. By afternoon the household knew. Servants moved quietly through the halls, eyes downcast, as trunks were carried from the Duchess's chamber. The maids wept openly. The butler polished the banister twice, though it already shone. The walls of Ravenshire seemed to hum with the ache of what they had witnessed. Celeste stood at the foot of the staircase, dressed in travelling attire. Grey wool cloak, gloves of kid leather, no jewels. Her beauty seemed dimmed, not by sorrow but by restraint. Dignity was her final armour. Mrs. Finch approached hesitantly. "My lady, shall I see that the coachman drives gently?" Celeste's smile was faint, kind. "No need. The road will be rough, but I have endured worse paths." The Duke did not appear, or so she thought. As the carriage door closed and the wheels began to turn, she glanced back through the misted glass. There, at the highest window, stood Edward Ravenshire, motionless as a statue. His hands rested on the sill, his face unreadable. For a moment, she thought she saw something glint, a flash of regret, perhaps even longing, but the distance and the frost between them made it uncertain. In her gloved hand, she held the single letter she had kept since winter, the one she had found in his study, bearing the words, "I cannot hate you, though I wish I could." She pressed it to her heart. "Nor I you," she whispered. The carriage rolled down the gravel drive, its sound fading into the hush of the countryside. Inside the manor, Edward remained by the window long after the carriage vanished into the pale horizon. Snow had begun to fall again, soft as ash, veiling the fields in white. He thought of her expression, the quiet dignity in her eyes when he condemned her, the tremor in her voice when she said love. He reached for the newspaper again, rereading the forged letter. This time it looked less convincing, its perfection too deliberate. He poured himself a drink, though the taste was bitter. Who would gain by destroying her? He murmured to the empty room, but he already knew the answer, or rather feared it. Somewhere in the recesses of his mind, a name stirred, wrapped in silk and malice. He looked down at the fireplace where the morning's embers still smouldered. The flames seemed to whisper accusation. For the first time in months he felt something close to remorse. It was unfamiliar, unwelcome, and utterly inescapable. Outside the wind rose, scattering ashes across the stone terrace, and far down the road, Lady Celeste Ravenshire's carriage disappeared into the falling snow, taking with it not only her innocence, but the last flicker of warmth that had once lived within his heart. He closed his eyes, his voice a whisper swallowed by the storm. God forgive me, if she does not. The harvest moon rose low and golden over the fields of Ashbourne, its light catching upon the ripened wheat like 1,000 polished coins. Autumn had painted the countryside in rust and amber, and laughter drifted from the great hall, where the Marquis of Ashbourne's guests gathered in merriment. Within those walls, candles gleamed upon crystal, violins wove through conversation, and the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and cider. Lady Celeste Ravenshire, now simply Lady Celeste, for she refused the title that bound her, stood at the edge of the ballroom, her gloved hands folded lightly before her. Her gown of soft dove-grey silk matched the quiet dignity that had become her armour. She had been in exile for nearly 6 months, dwelling at her family's modest estate, where gossip could not yet reach. Time had steadied her, but it had not healed her. "London misses you, my lady," said a young debutante with a teasing curtsy. "They say the Duke does as well." Celeste smiled faintly, her voice even. "Then I pity London, for it thrives on illusions." The girl flushed and withdrew, leaving Celeste alone once more. The musicians struck a lively reel, and the laughter grew louder. She felt the faintest ache of envy, not for the gaiety but for the simplicity of it. To laugh without memory, to dance without ghosts. The Marquis of Ashbourne approached, his silver hair gleaming beneath the chandeliers. He was an old friend of the Ravenshire family, a widower of kindly manners and keen observation. "My dear Lady Celeste," he greeted warmly, "how it gladdens me to see you smile again, though I suspect it is not wholly sincere." She inclined her head. "Sincerity is a luxury rarely afforded to women of my acquaintance. My lord, still sharp, I see." He offered her his arm, and they walked slowly toward the quieter edge of the hall, where the fire burned low and the murmur of voices softened. "You have heard the talk, of course," he said after a pause, "that you are to remarry. A viscount, is it? Or perhaps a poet?" Celeste gave a small, rueful laugh. "Ah, the tongue never tires of inventing my happiness. They would rather I remarry than forgive." The Marquis studied her face. "And yet you have done neither." She turned her gaze toward the window, where the moonlight silvered the glass. "Forgiveness requires understanding," she said softly. "And I was never granted that." Later that evening, after the final waltz had faded into laughter and applause, the Marquis invited her to join him in the study for a quiet glass of brandy. The room was lined with books and heavy with the scent of oak and tobacco. "Permit an old man a confession," he began, as he poured the amber liquid into crystal. "There are truths a gentleman sometimes delays speaking, hoping time will reveal them kindly. But time, I find, is a poor friend to truth." Celeste regarded him with mild curiosity. "You speak as though burdened, my lord." Indeed, he turned toward the hearth, his voice lowering. "The letter, the one that condemned you before the Duke, was not yours." She froze. The word struck her like a blade through glass. "I know that," she said quietly. But few others cared to believe it. He met her gaze, his eyes sorrowful. "It was forged, Celeste. And I have proof. I learned only recently, through channels better left unnamed. The handwriting, though imitated, was the work of Lady Evelyn Montrose and her cousin, Captain Lyle." Her breath caught, the brandy trembling in her hand. "Lady Evelyn—" The name escaped her lips like poison. "She wished to ruin you both," the Marquis continued gravely. "Your husband had once courted her before your engagement. She believed you stole his affections, or at least his pride. The captain delivered the forgery to the press for coin and favour. Together they accomplished what jealousy alone could not." Celeste sank into the nearest chair, her composure wavering for the first time in months. Then everything, the whispers, the exile, was built upon a lie. "I fear so," the Marquis said softly. "I would not have spoken, but it seemed cruel to let the truth rot in silence." For a long moment, the only sound was the crackle of the fire. She rose at last, the fragile calm of her voice belying the tempest within. "If what you say is true, then I have been punished for another's deceit, and he condemned me without faith. Men of pride are slow to see the wounds they inflict," said the Marquis gently. Hands slower still to ask forgiveness. She turned toward the window where the night pressed close and the harvest moon hung heavy. Her reflection in the glass was ghost-like, her eyes glistening with unshed fury. "Then it falls to me to make him see." The Marquis hesitated. "You intend to return to London?" Her answer came without hesitation. "Not for reconciliation, my lord. For truth. He must know that he wronged not only me, but himself." He sighed, half in admiration, half in fear. "You will tread a dangerous path, Celeste. The ton loves scandal more than justice." "Then let it watch," she said, her voice quiet yet resolute. "It has taken my name. It shall not take my peace." When the clock struck midnight, the guests had all retired. Celeste stood alone upon the terrace, her shawl drawn tight against the autumn chill. The field stretched before her, silvered in moonlight, and the wind carried the scent of turned earth and fallen leaves. She thought of Ravenshire, of its empty halls, its marble staircases echoing with regret. She saw again the Duke's face as he turned from her, his eyes cold with disbelief. How many nights had she replayed that moment, seeking reason in the ruin? Now at last reason had found her. She drew a letter from her reticule, the one she had kept folded against her heart through every lonely night. His handwriting, still visible despite its creases. "I cannot hate you, though I wish I could." "Then you shall learn," she whispered to the wind, "how love survives what pride destroys." The church bells of Ashbourne began to toll in the distance, 12 slow notes that rolled across the valley like the echo of fate itself. Celeste lifted her face to the moonlight, her eyes fierce with purpose. Somewhere the Duke still lived his lie. But by dawn, she vowed, her carriage would be bound for London, not for love, but for justice. As the final bell faded into silence, the wind rose, carrying her vow into the night and far away. In Ravenshire House, Edward Ravenshire stirred from uneasy sleep, a chill passing through him as though a name long buried had been spoken aloud. Winter had returned to London with all its merciless splendour. Frost jewelled the iron railings along Grosvenor Square, and the city's lamps burned like captured stars against a sky of glassy black. Inside the ballroom of Lord Westmere's mansion, laughter, perfume, and the rustle of silk filled the air. But beneath the glitter, the ton fed hungrily on its favourite fare, Scandal. And tonight, Scandal had chosen to wear grey silk and pearls. When Lady Celeste Ravenshire stepped through the ballroom doors, conversation froze mid-breath. Her return was not expected, and certainly not so poised, so radiant, so unafraid. The orchestra faltered for half a beat before resuming, but the damage was done. London's pulse had skipped, every head turned. She wore a gown the colour of moonlight, simple, elegant, deliberate. Her hair, dark and gleaming, was swept into a modest chignon, leaving her neck bare but for a single teardrop pearl. The effect was that of quiet defiance, the fallen Duchess reborn not in opulence, but in composure. Whispers fluttered like moths in her wake. Good God, she's returned. Alone, no less. Her audacity surpasses even her beauty. Celeste glided through them, her expression serene, her heart a storm beneath the calm. She had imagined this moment countless times in the solitude of the countryside, how she would face those who had feasted on her disgrace, how she would carry herself as though untouched by ruin. Now that the hour had come, she found a strange, steady courage rising within her. "Lady Celeste," the voice was low, familiar. She turned. There, across the ballroom, stood the Duke of Ravenshire. He looked older than she remembered, his proud composure tempered by something hollow. His dark hair, once polished to perfection, had a trace of silver at the temples. The fine cut of his coat could not disguise the weariness in his stance, nor the shadow in his eyes. The crowd parted instinctively as he crossed toward her. The murmur swelled, pressing against the music like a rising tide. When he stopped before her, "The moment hung suspended, Your Grace," she said, her tone even measured. He bowed, an action so slow, so deliberate it seemed almost penitential. "You look well, my lady." Her gaze met his, calm and unyielding. "Truth," she said softly, "has a way of healing what pride destroys." Something flickered in his expression. Pain, admiration, shame. She could not tell. Around them, the ton watched as if witnessing a duel fought with glances instead of blades. He hesitated. "You should not have returned to this den of vipers." She smiled faintly. "Then allow me to teach them which venom truly burns." A ripple of unease passed through the crowd. At the edge of the room, Lady Evelyn Montrose, once the very portrait of grace, stiffened. Her complexion, pale beneath layers of powder, betrayed the tremor beneath her fan. She had thought her treachery buried with Celeste's exile. But rumour like frost crept into every corner, and tonight it had arrived. The Marquis of Ashbourne's subtle words, whispered into the right ears, had begun their work. Already sidelong glances gathered around her like smoke. "Lady Evelyn," someone murmured behind a gloved hand. "They say she wrote the forged letter herself." "Impossible," whispered another. "The Duke would have known, would he?" Came the answering hiss. "Men see what flattery permits them to see." Evelyn's fan quivered. Across the room, Celeste's gaze met hers, steady, calm, merciless. It was not hatred that passed between them, but something colder, the quiet assurance of a reckoning delayed, not denied. Evelyn turned away, her smile faltering as the whispers multiplied. The orchestra began a waltz. "Will you dance, my lady?" the Duke asked quietly. Celeste regarded him for a long moment. Once she had longed for those words. Now they felt like a test she no longer needed to pass. "Does your grace invite me as penance or as habit?" He inclined his head. "As neither. Only as a man who remembers too late what he has lost." Her eyes softened, but her tone remained steady. "Then dance if you must. But know this. I do not return to restore what once was. I return to reveal what never should have been." He offered his hand. She accepted. They stepped onto the floor. The waltz began, slow, haunting. The Duke's hand rested lightly against her waist, her gloved fingers upon his shoulder. To the watching world, they seemed flawless, two figures reunited beneath the golden light, moving with effortless precision. But to Celeste, each turn was an act of restraint, every breath a negotiation between pride and memory. "London believes you seek revenge," he murmured. "London believes whatever suits its appetite," she replied. "But I seek truth, not vengeance. And if truth condemns me, then it redeems me." For the first time in months, his mask of civility faltered. "I wronged you," he said under his breath, his voice raw. "And yet you stand before me, serene as ever. Does nothing move you, Celeste?" She met his gaze without flinching. "Once everything you said moved me. Now only justice does." Their dance carried them past Lady Evelyn's circle. The murmurs ceased as Celeste's skirts brushed the hem of Evelyn's gown, a silent challenge, elegant and lethal. When the music slowed to its final chord, the Duke released her hand reluctantly, as though the touch had burned him. Applause scattered lightly through the hall, but the ton's attention was elsewhere. On Evelyn, whose mask of charm was beginning to crack, a gentleman near the fireplace whispered too loudly, "It was she, you know. The Marquis confirmed it." Celeste turned away, refusing to bask in her enemy's unravelling. Her victory, if it came, would not be born of rumour, but of revelation. She crossed to the far side of the ballroom, pausing before a mirror framed in gilded ivy. For a moment, she studied her own reflection, the calm mouth, the steady eyes, the woman who had once trembled before society's gaze, now unmoved beneath it. "I have come full circle," she thought, "but I am no longer the same." Behind her the Duke approached once more, his expression troubled. If the forger's name reaches the papers, it will ruin her utterly. "Then perhaps ruin," Celeste said quietly, "is the one language London understands." He hesitated. "And what of me?" She looked at him, her voice soft but sure. "You must choose whether you will stand beside the truth or behind it." For a moment, the air between them trembled with all that remained unspoken, love wounded, trust buried, hearts still tethered by memory. Then, as the orchestra began another waltz, she turned away, her silk gown catching the light like liquid silver. The Duke watched her go, no longer a woman he commanded, but one he must now follow if he hoped to be forgiven. At the far end of the room, the Marquis of Ashbourne raised his glass in quiet salute. Justice had stirred at last, though not yet complete. The night's elegance could not disguise the shifting power beneath it. The Duchess, once scorned, now held London's gaze in her hand. Celeste felt it too. The tide had turned. As she stepped into the next waltz, another hand, unfamiliar, polite, reached for hers. The Duke took a single step forward, his jaw set, his decision made. He would follow her this time, not as a master, but as a man seeking forgiveness. And somewhere in the shadows, Lady Evelyn's laughter fractured like glass. Dawn crept reluctantly across the meadows of Hampstead Heath, pale and shivering. A thin veil of mist drifted low over the frost-bitten grass, muffling sound, softening light, turning the world ghost-like, suspended between night and day. The air held its breath, as though it too awaited judgment. Two men stood opposite one another in the half-light. One, the Duke of Ravenshire, broad-shouldered, composed, yet hollow-eyed from sleepless nights. The other, Captain Lisle, once his fellow officer, now the name whispered in every corner of the Tun as the man who had received the Duchess's supposed letter of love. Between them their seconds exchanged grim nods. Steel flashed in the dimness, swords drawn, points lowered. "Your Grace," said Captain Lisle, his voice taut, "I have accepted this challenge, though I swear before God I never sought your wife's dishonour." The Duke's reply was cold as the morning air. "Then you should not have borne her name upon your lips, forged or otherwise. It was not I who— Enough." The Duke's tone cut sharper than his blade. "You will answer with your sword, not your tongue." The seconds stepped back. The mist thickened. The first bell of St. Mary's struck in the distance, solemn, warning, final, and in that moment from beyond the hedgerow came the sound of hooves. Celeste's carriage hurtled down the narrow road, wheels biting into the wet earth. She leaned forward, one gloved hand clutching the edge of the door as if sheer will might hasten the horses. "Faster, Thomas," she urged, breathless. "If we do not reach them before the sun rises—" "Yes, my lady." Her heart pounded in rhythm with the hooves. She had learned of the duel not from the Duke himself, but from the Marquis of Ashbourne, who had arrived at her door just past midnight, face grave, voice trembling with urgency. "Ravenshire means to fight the captain at dawn," he'd said. "He will kill him or be killed himself. Either way, Lady Evelyn wins." Celeste had not paused, and now as the carriage jolted to a halt upon the meadow's edge, she flung open the door before it stopped moving. Her boots sank into the frozen grass. The cold bit through silk and bone alike. She lifted her skirts and ran. Through the mist she saw them, two dark figures, blades drawn, silhouettes against the faintening night. "Edward!" Her cry shattered the stillness. Both men turned. The Duke's sword lowered an inch. "Celeste." "What are you doing here?" She reached them, breathless, her cheeks flushed from wind and fear. "Preventing madness," she gasped. "If this is honor, then heaven itself must weep." "This is justice," he answered grimly. "My name demands—" "Your name?" Her voice broke through his pride like a bell through fog. "What? Of your heart, your Grace. Will you bury that beside your reputation too?" The seconds exchanged uneasy glances. The captain's eyes softened. "Your Grace," he began, "Lady Ravenshire speaks truth. I cannot fight you. There is more you must know." "Speak then," the Duke demanded, lowering his blade fully. Lisle hesitated, shame tightening his throat. "The letter. It was not hers. Lady Evelyn Montrose and her suitor, Lord Strathmere, were the architects of this deceit. They forged her hand, bribed a printer, and delivered it to the papers. I carried it, yes, but only as messenger, never knowing its poison until it was too late." Celeste's breath caught. The Duke's sword slipped slightly in his grasp. "Evelyn," he whispered, disbelief warring with dawning understanding. "She?" The captain nodded, his voice breaking. "She feared losing your favor, and wished to ruin the one who held it. I would not have come here today had I not learned the truth myself." The mist swirled, the dawn bleeding faint pink across the horizon. For a heartbeat, silence fell, fragile, electric. The Duke's shoulders sagged under the weight of what pride had cost him. He turned toward Celeste. "I condemned you," he said hoarsely. "I believed what the world whispered before I trusted what my own heart knew." She closed her eyes, the tears she had sworn never to shed burning anew. "And still you came to kill for that same pride." He opened his mouth to answer, but a sudden cry broke from one of the seconds. From the fog emerged another figure, Lord Strathmere, Evelyn's jilted suitor, his eyes wild with fury. "She was to be mine," he shouted, stumbling forward, sword already drawn. "You destroyed her, Ravenshire. You and your whimpering saint of a wife." Before anyone could move, he lunged. The Duke turned, blade rising to parry, but Strathmere's aim was wild, desperate. The point of his sword arced not toward the Duke, but toward Celeste. Celeste! Time fractured. The world narrowed to breath, to motion, to a single heartbeat. She stepped instinctively between them, as though her body alone could halt the violence pride had unleashed. The blade grazed her shoulder, slicing through silk and flesh alike. Crimson bloomed across her ivory lace like a rose opening in time-lapse horror. The Duke's cry echoed across the meadow, raw and unrestrained. He caught her before she fell, her weight light against him, her blood staining his coat. "Not you, my love," he whispered, voice breaking. "Not you." Her lips trembled into a faint smile. "You called me your love." He pressed a trembling hand against the wound, frantic. "Do not speak. Save your strength." Her eyes fluttered. "You always sought to protect your name, Edward. Now protect your soul." The seconds rushed forward, subduing Strathmere, who dropped his sword and sank to his knees, overcome by what he had done. Captain Lyle barked orders for the carriage, his hands shaking. The Duke cradled Celeste, his forehead against hers. "Forgive me," he breathed. "For every silence, every doubt, every hour I let pride speak where love should have." She reached for his cheek, her fingers smearing blood against his skin. "Then let love speak now, while I can still hear it." He took her hand and pressed it to his lips. "I will not lose you again." Her lashes lowered. "Then do not let me die among strangers." By the time the carriage arrived, the horizon had turned gold. The duel's field, once the ground of pride and vengeance, now lay silent except for the sound of their hearts, steady but fragile. Inside the carriage, Celeste leaned against him, her head resting on his chest. The bleeding had slowed, her breath shallow but calm. Outside, the sun rose over the frost-kissed fields, turning the mist into a veil of light. She stirred faintly, whispering, "When the truth is spoken." Perhaps forgiveness need not wait for heaven. He looked down at her, his eyes burning with a devotion stripped of pretense. "You are my truth, Celeste. Always were." The carriage wheels rolled toward Ravenshire. Each turn of the wheel marked not an ending, but a reckoning. Behind them, in the meadow, the abandoned swords lay crossed, one gleaming faintly in sunlight, the other dulled by dew and regret. And far across London, whispers already stirred anew. But this time they would speak not of scandal, but of redemption, of the Duchess who had returned, and the Duke who at last had learned how to kneel. For dawn had broken, and though blood still marked the frost, it gleamed like rubies in the sun, proof that even pain could be transfigured by love. The great house of Ravenshire lay cloaked in silence. Its corridors, once filled with the murmurs of servants and the echo of ordered footsteps, now held only the quiet weight of vigil. The storm that had begun at dawn had passed, leaving behind skies washed pale with sorrow and windows rimed with dew. In the Duchess's chamber, the fire burned low, throwing soft wavering light across the bed where Celeste lay unmoving. Her skin was white as the linen beneath her, her breathing shallow, almost soundless. The wound on her shoulder, though tended by the physician, had stolen more than blood, it had stolen warmth. Her pulse fluttered like a candle caught in a draught, its flame bending, refusing to die. At her side sat the Duke of Ravenshire. His coat lay discarded upon the chair, his once polished boots dulled by mud. He had not slept. He had not left. He had not prayed until now. His hands, strong, accustomed to command, rested helplessly upon her coverlet. "Do not leave me," he whispered, voice raw. "Not now, when I have only begun to see what love truly is." The candle sputtered, throwing shadows like ghosts against the walls. From the bedside table, a small chest stood open, the one found in her chamber earlier that night, filled with neatly folded letters bound in faded ribbon. Her maid had brought it to him in trembling hands. "She wrote them," the girl had said softly, but never sent them. He had opened the first with dread, the paper fragile from being held too long by uncertain fingers. "Your Grace, I sometimes think you fear kindness more than betrayal, as though gentleness might reveal your weakness. I wish you knew that I have never sought to wound your pride, only to reach the heart that lies buried beneath it." The Duke's vision had blurred. Now, in the flickering firelight, He unfolded another, his voice low, reverent. "If I die unloved, I shall still have lived with dignity. For love unreturned does not vanish. It merely changes form, becoming patience, faith, forgiveness." He pressed the page to his lips. "My God," he murmured, "you were the truer soul between us." The clock in the corridor struck 3. Beyond the window, snow fell soundlessly, covering the courtyard in soft silver. The scent of lavender lingered from the poultices upon her wound. The physician had gone, leaving instructions and little hope. "If she survives the night," he had said, "she will live. But the heart, your grace, it has endured much." The Duke remained, his head bowed upon his clasped hands. He could no longer distinguish guilt from prayer. In the quiet, he spoke, not as the proud man society knew, but as one stripped bare before mercy. "I thought love was a transaction," he confessed, voice breaking. "A contract of names and estates, yet you gave without expectation, and I repaid you with suspicion. When I cast you out, I thought myself strong. But I was only cowardly. You bore my cruelty with grace I did not deserve." He reached out, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. Her skin was cool. Her lashes, long and still, cast faint shadows upon her cheeks. "I would trade every acre of Ravenshire," he whispered. "Every title, every ounce of esteem for one breath of yours." The only reply was the faint crackle of the fire. Hours passed. The snow thickened. At last a pale gleam of early light began to press against the window panes. The Duke stirred, lifting his head. The letters lay scattered around him now, his confessions through her words. Each one pierced more deeply than any blade ever could. One, smaller than the rest, caught his eye. It was addressed not to him, but simply, "To the man I loved, should he ever learn too late." His breath caught. He opened it. "There is a truth we all face in time, that love is not owed, only offered. I would rather have loved in silence than lived in comfort without it. If you ever come to see me clearly, let it not be through tears, but through understanding." He folded the letter carefully, his vision unsteady. "I see you," he murmured. "Too late, but I see you." As he reached to place the letter beside her pillow, a sound so faint he thought it imagined broke the stillness. A breath. A whisper. "Edward." He froze. Her eyes fluttered open, glassy, unfocused, then fixed upon him with fragile recognition. "Celeste." His voice failed him. He fell to his knees beside the bed, grasping her hand as though it were the very anchor of his soul. "You must rest, do not speak." Her lips curved in the faintest of smiles. "You read them." He nodded, tears burning in his eyes. "Everyone. They were never meant to accuse," she murmured weakly. "Only to remember. They have forgiven me more than I can bear." She stirred faintly, wincing as pain rippled through her. "Then bear it, Edward. Let it make you gentle." He bowed his head over her hand, the touch of her skin fragile as silk. "No vow of mine shall ever be loveless again," he said solemnly. Her gaze softened. "Then I have not suffered in vain." Outside, the first true light of dawn spread across the sky, bathing Ravenshire in pale gold. The snow upon the courtyard glittered, and the frost upon the windows melted into tears. Celeste's breathing steadied, though faint. Her colour returned by degrees, the ghost of life reclaiming her. The Duke remained kneeling, her hand still in his. He watched as the sun's light touched her face, gilding her features until she seemed almost unearthly. "Do you see it?" she whispered faintly. "What, my love?" "The morning." He looked toward the window. The horizon burned with rose and amber. The storm spent, the world washed clean. "Yes," he said softly. "It is beautiful. It feels like absolution." He pressed a kiss to her fingers. "Then let it be ours." The servants gathered quietly in the corridor, whispering that the Duchess still lived. Hope, long absent from the house, stirred again like warmth from a rekindled hearth. The butler, who had served 3 generations, crossed himself and murmured, "God has turned his face toward Ravenshire once more." Within, the Duke rose at last and sat beside the bed, exhaustion softening his features. Celeste's eyes had closed again, her breathing steady in sleep. He watched her for a long while, tracing the curve of her hand, the faint smile at the corner of her mouth. Then, turning toward the window, he whispered into the pale gold air, "Let this dawn bear witness. The man who loved too late will love now forever." The fire cracked, the candles guttered, and somewhere outside, a lark began to sing, the first of spring's fragile voices. Ravenshire had woken. and with the breaking of that day, redemption had begun. The winter that had nearly claimed her life gave way at last to spring. Ravenshire bloomed again, its stone terraces overgrown with wisteria, its fountains alive with water that sparkled like liquid glass beneath the morning sun. Yet within the chapel grounds, a different kind of renewal awaited, a quieter miracle, one wrought not of season, but of souls. The chapel had long stood in disrepair, its stained glass windows dulled by time, and its pews veiled in dust. But now, after months of careful restoration, it stood reborn, sunlight spilling through jeweled panes, casting fragments of ruby, sapphire, and gold upon the marble floor. The scent of lilies and polished wood filled the air, and at the altar, where once there had been pride, silence and grief, stood the Duke of Ravenshire, waiting not as a man bound by duty, but as one redeemed by love. The ton had gathered again, summoned by curiosity as much as invitation. Whispers rippled softly through the pews. "Do you think she will appear? They say she nearly died for him." "Then perhaps he is worthy of her after all." The Duke heard their murmurs but paid them no mind. His eyes were fixed upon the chapel doors, where sunlight pooled like a promise, and then she entered. Lady Celeste Ravenshire, no longer merely a duchess by name, but by choice, moved slowly down the aisle. Her gown was not the opulent white of new brides, but ivory silk touched with faint gold, as though time itself had blessed it. Her veil, sheer and weightless, caught the morning light, turning her into something half ethereal, half human. Every step echoed softly, and with it came the murmur of recognition. Society, once cruel in its gossip, now held its breath. The Duke's chest tightened. He had faced battlefields, courts, and scandal, yet never had he felt so unsteady as in that moment. Her eyes, clear, calm, unguarded, met his, and something within him stilled. When she reached the altar, he stepped forward. For a moment they simply stood, two figures surrounded by beauty and silence, the ghosts of their former selves fading into the air between them. The chaplain spoke, his voice resonant but gentle. "My lord and lady, you stand before God and before those who have witnessed your trials. Do you come freely to renew your vows of love and faith?" Celeste's voice, soft yet steady, answered first. "I do." Then the Duke, "With all my heart I do." A quiet sigh rippled through the congregation, some in wonder, others in envy. When the chaplain invited them to speak their own vows, Edward took her hand. His thumb brushed lightly against her pulse, still faint from her long recovery. "Celeste," he began, his voice trembling with emotion he no longer sought to hide, "I once vowed to never love you. It was the only promise I ever broke gladly." She closed her eyes, tears glistening beneath her lashes. "I loved my name, my pride, and my estate more than truth," he continued. "But you, who asked for none of it, taught me what it means to give without measure. You turned my silence into shame and my shame into repentance. From this day, my life is no longer my own but yours." Her hand trembled in his, not from weakness but from feeling too vast to contain. "Edward," she whispered, "I once believed forgiveness was the language of saints, not the living. Yet here we are, living, breathing proof that grace is found not in perfection, but in persistence. If love is patient, it is because it waits through pride and pain until both are humbled." A murmur stirred among the guests. No grander sermon could have followed. The chaplain smiled faintly and turned to bless them. "Then what pride tore asunder, love has joined anew. Let the world bear witness to mercy fulfilled." The church bells rang, a cascade of silver notes tumbling across the courtyard. As they echoed, the sunlight deepened, spilling through the stained glass in molten color, crowning the couple in shifting halos of crimson and gold. Celeste looked upward, watching the light tremble against the vaults above them. The same world that had once condemned her now seemed to kneel in reverence. When she turned back to him, her voice was soft, barely a whisper. "Do you remember the letter you never sent?" He nodded, his throat tight. "Every word, especially the line that said, 'I cannot hate you, though I wish I could.'" She smiled through her tears. "Then you have fulfilled it. For love, when true, needs no defense." He drew her closer, his hand upon her cheek. "And you, do you forgive me, Celeste?" Her answer came not in words, but in the kiss that followed. Gentle, steady, without spectacle, as though the world itself had fallen away and left only the two of them suspended in light. The congregation rose. The organ began its triumphant chords, swelling to fill every corner of the chapel. Outside, the bells pealed again, longer, brighter, carrying across the city like a benediction. Later, beneath the oak trees of Ravenshire's courtyard, the guests mingled among flowers and laughter. The scandal that had once devoured their names now seemed a distant fable, spoken of with awe, not malice. "Did you ever think they would stand together again?" whispered one lady. "Perhaps heaven thought them worthy of a second chance," replied another, as the Duke escorted Celeste through the throng, heads bowed, not in mockery but in admiration. He felt none of his former pride, only the peace of a man who had been granted mercy. At the edge of the garden, away from the crowd, Celeste paused. "Do you hear it?" she asked. "The bells?" "No," she said, smiling faintly. "The quiet after them. It feels like freedom." He followed her gaze to the horizon, where the sky blazed with sunset, turning the air to gold. "Then may it never leave us," he said softly. She turned to him, eyes luminous. "It never will, so long as we remember what it cost." He drew her into his arms, the fading light haloing them both. Inside the chapel, the last candle flickered out, its smoke rising toward the vaulted ceiling like a final prayer. In that sacred stillness, their story, once marked by pride, silence, and separation, rested now in peace. For love, they had learned, is not born perfect. It is made so through forgiveness, and thus, beneath the watchful gaze of heaven and the forgiving murmur of the earth, the Duke and Duchess of Ravenshire were finally free, no longer bound by duty or rumor, but joined by grace, by truth, and by choice. Outside, the bells of Ravenshire tolled one last time, not as lamentation, but as rejoicing, and as their echo faded into the blue dusk, a narrator might have said, love once scorned had come full circle, not to conquer but to redeem,